Hello all, I was dwelling on this issue of the Afghanistani migrants coming in and how it's completely shot all of the credibility of the Tory party, and that got me extrapolating things, and it made me think, look, we're at a point now where I think it's undeniable. We're on a track to not just the Tory party falling apart, but the liberal system itself, and I wanted to explore a bit on this channel how we can predict that path to a certain extent and maybe look at what might come after it. And I know some people think I'm being a bit apocalyptic or melodramatic, but I don't think I am at all. I mean, every system in history ends. The British Empire ended, the Soviet Union collapsed, the Holy Roman Empire ended, Byzantium ended, the Roman Empire itself ended. In human history, you have power structures of a given age, they have their day in the sun, they start to corrode, I think we're seeing that in the Western world now, and then they pass on to something else. And that's the real question. What will the next power structure be? And what will the state of the UK and Europe be like as we move towards that? Now, just to start from the top, I do think this Afghanistan migrant issue is huge, because I was quietly thinking that the Tories might stage a bit of a comeback because Farage was just going too close to the centre, just becoming another Liberal. And I thought Jenrick had a real shot, because let's be honest, Kemi's going nowhere. It's dead easy to say to her, well, look, you're an anchor baby. Who are you to lecture anyone about immigration? And plus, she's just not inspiring, is she? I mean, do we really want a Nigerian, leading a revival of Britain? I'm not personally sure I do, and I dare say the mass of the public would agree with me, whether they'd admit it or not. But the next point is, I thought, well, look, it seems open for Jenrick, who seems to be making some of the right noises. You can tell he, is trying to get the sort of conservative heartlands back, even the populist vote, out Farage in many ways. However, it's pretty obvious now that Jenrick was in on this Afghan migrant scheme too. There's pictures of him that are being published with, an Afghani family. And this is just going to get worse and worse. It just means that nobody has a leg to stand on. Keir Starmer doesn't have a leg to stand on for this and other reasons, of course. Kemi Badenoch doesn't. Jenrick doesn't. So the mainstream are just screwed. And it's just going to keep getting worse and worse. I mean, I did see something about how the Taliban have come out and said they've had access to all these leaked data from the very beginning anyway. So none of it matters, that our government's saying. And like I said in the video I did on it, a lot of this is dodgy anyway. A soldier just randomly sends an email to an Afghani. I mean, come on. I mean, we've all worked in offices. How often do you do that sort of thing? It just doesn't really add up, especially if these are highly secure interactions. But anyway, aside from that, like I say, it's just going to keep getting worse for them. And again, the public are going to just be, I think, outraged, because this scheme is just costing us billions, and they're always looking at where they can basically take money away from the public, scrimping and saving there, and then just throwing money away for these mad schemes, which at this point you just have to assume they do this because they want to flood us. And I've been over that many times on the channel as to why. If you have a disorganized nation with no cohesion, no shared identity, it's very easy to control. You can't organize the people. It's easy for the people who do try and organize to be demonized and seen as bad, and it's just easy to dominate. I also saw Matt Goodwin say that over 1 million foreigners are claiming universal credit. Only 40% of these are in work, apparently. These foreign-born nationals, which is just madness. As I keep saying, the system is just done for. It's out of control. And this is all, of course, an open door for reform. But as I've said before on the channel, Farage is clearly softening his stance. He's angling for power. And even though Farage isn't performing great by any means, Labour and Tories are just so screwed at this point. He barely has to do anything. In fact, he could just keep his mouth shut and he would pretty much be a shoo-in for number 10. The only thing is, are people going to realise that Farage is basically going to be ultimately more of the same, just in more of a right-wing mould? What I'm talking to here is Richard Tice, the number 2 in Reform. People have dug up tweets of him from 2021 saying we must protect those brave Afghans who helped us and their families by settling them in the UK. Now, I suppose Tice could argue back, but I wouldn't say that I would keep it secret like the powers that be have, but I think people will be their own judge on that. And as I've pointed out many times, the problem with Farage is yeah, he speaks a good game. He's full of character. But the issue is, it's really just sort of Thatcherism warmed up for a new era. Many of the sort of red wall types like him because he's patriotic. As I've said this before, you go back to the 80s, yeah, there was a big dislike between the left and right, but they both love the country. Nowadays, the issue is the left doesn't like the country, the right does. And the left think it's noble to not like it. So as soon as somebody likes it and stands up for it, they will get support, even from traditional leftist voters, because they might be like old school Dennis Skinner leftists, who basically, used to work down the mines, or at least their fathers did, but they love the country. But the issue is, I think Farage is going to find it hard to unify that vote because he's such a Thatcherite neoliberal economically himself anyway. So, as I keep coming back to on the channel at the moment, it's not just that we've got a bad crop of politicians, it's that the system itself is screwed, And I'm not saying that, everything can be fixed tomorrow. I think when a system is on its way out, it takes decades for something new to come along. And we have to remember as well, especially with the millennial generation onwards, there's decades of propaganda to push back against because the university system, the education system, the media has been corrupt now for at least 20 years, probably more. And that means they're all brainwashed in this stuff and they think they're so clever because they've read Foucault and, Jean Baudrillard and all these sort of post-structuralists. Or even more simply, they've read Chomsky or whatever. Or just listen to, what's ever popular today, Vogue or MTV or all that sort of stuff that just really presents these same ideas in a much more bubblegum way. But then at the same time, while that process will have to be done, while the mass brainwashing will have to be undone, the boomer generation will be passing on. They're getting old now, late 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. And in 10 to 20 years, a large chunk of those will have passed through the workforce, will be either passed away or on their last legs. And with the boomers will go that sort of 60s naive ideal of, I'd like to teach the world to sing. We can all hold hands and all we've got to do is look at our own evil inside of us and Forrest Gump and the rest of it. It's not really, it's not the real world. And of course, that illusion is probably going to die with the boomers. I don't think they'll truly see the state that Europe will fall into, but it will probably die with them. And that will, of course, all open up a massive opportunity for the British, I think the Europeans at large, to understand who we really are. And we're going to have to break free of not just the liberal conditioning, but also the left-right conditioning. Because again, this is just another trap which solidifies our ego. And as I've said many times, I think there is going to be more crossover in the future. For instance, I'm an older millennial, but I can see with younger millennials and even Zoomers, they're not the sort of out-and-out capitalists like Thatcher or Farage is. That's something Farage has got to hide. Because to them, globalism, the markets, all right, yeah, there's opportunities to make lots of money, but there's something very corroding about it. There's something that just doesn't value home and people and nation and soul and God, all the things they're yearning for. So yeah, you can keep with the promises of, pro-liberty and pro-markets and all that stuff, but that only really works if you have a foundation to build upon, which they did back in the day. We don't anymore. Britain is gone. So people aren't really interested in sort of free market ideas when you have no foundation because you completely atomize. It's just a materialist race to the bottom. Oh, look at my flash car that I can drive through these decrepit neighborhoods that are on fire. Well, great. It's not very good for the soul, that sort of thing. So my point is that there is going to be a big shift that's going to start to happen. And I think it's going to happen after 2029. Because people still, broadly speaking, are going to think that it's going to turn around with reform or something. And I do think Farage is increasingly in a better position by the day. And he could win outright at this point. If Labour and Tories keep going the way they are, he could have a shot at just winning outright because everyone's so fed up. He could just dominate. I probably think there will be some sort of coalition down the line. And if we're not careful, and people might have to tactically vote here, but we could end up with a leftist coalition, and that would be just hell. I mean, if we think it's bad now, imagine another 5 years of some green lib lab, coalition, the endless liberal naivety. Again, I just think the country would just be on fire every day for 5 years if that happened. It just doesn't bear thinking about, but it's not beyond the realms of possibility. But if that happened, it would just accelerate everything. I think the country would collapse. in a couple of years of that. But this is why I think after 2029, whether it is, this leftist coalition from hell, or whether it's Farage and is finally realising, like, look, this liberal ideal isn't going to work, even if it's a right-wing liberal ideal like Farage. We're still going to have the underpinning of globalisation, the undermining of our country. At that point, I think we're going to see the beginnings of balkanisation, which I've been speaking about on this channel since the beginning. And I think that's already starting. I've spoken about it a lot in prior videos. The most obvious example of it is the Islamic bloc vote. They were talking about it in the run-up to the last election, and they'd already organised on the basis of Gaza, Islamic issues and so on. We're only going to see more of that. Jeremy Corbyn, the useful idiot that he is, so naive in his socialism, has joined up with Zara Sultana and that other group of independent Muslim MPs. And basically they're just going to run on the ticket of Gaza. And, you don't have to be Einstein to figure out that that's going to be, of course, immediately moved towards Islamic ethno-religious aims. And in a way, I don't even blame them, I think, what do we expect them to do? Like, come here and end up, going on pride marches, listening to Wham, going to Oasis concerts. They're not going to do that. It's just madness to think they are. And yet I know you can find some, gay guy called Ahmed who's so happy he's in the UK because he can't tell his Pakistani family he's gay, or introduce them to, Tom, his boyfriend from Worcestershire. I know those people exist, but they're a minority. The broader issue is here that the Islamic bloc vote is growing, and they're going to push more and more and more for their own geopolitical and ethno-religious aims. That's unavoidable now. But what happens is the response to that. And the first thing is, a lot of the leftists who have really defined themselves against hating the right. This is why I often say, especially on the sister channel, you got to get rid of that resentment and hatred towards others, because you won't see what's good for you. Just like these leftists, they define themselves, like Jess Phillips, she defines herself about being the moral working class woman who hates the Tories, hates the right, those cruel bastards, I'm so against them because I'm a good person. Well, look, there might be some truth in there along the line that, the sort of greedy merchant factory owner back in the day for a grandfather in Birmingham. Yeah, all right, fair argument. But the point is, she's become so identified with that, she doesn't see that she's going to lose her own seat in the next election to this Islamic bloc, And then it won't be so wonderful, will it? When you're like, oh yeah, multiculturalism, all the whites are racist and evil. It's not going to work then, with your happy sing-songs and Glastonbury. Then you're going to be like, oh, hang on, I've lost my seat to a radical Islamist. Great. And I think more and more leftists are going to start to realise, look, we've got to let go of some of these historic biases, angers we have, if you like. And I think this is where more British people will start to think outside of the left-right dynamic. I think people are frightened to do that now because we're so defined by hating the left or hating the right. I think that's got to end, and there's something bigger at play. But second to that, I think other groups in Britain are going to look at what's going on with the Muslims, and they're going to start thinking, well, hang on a minute, I don't like the look of this, namely Hindus. I mean, I'm from Leicester. We've already seen on the streets Hindus and Muslims squaring up to each other in Leicester. Now, this speaks to a bigger issue at the moment, which is something, I've experienced as well in London, which is, look, we're all supposed to believe in the wonderful multicultural ideal. The only reason it won't work is because of those stupid, idiot, bigot gammons who are so disgusting and racist and evil. They dragged the country down. And if they weren't there, wouldn't it be perfect? Part of me wishes the UK could split and they can have their utopia and we can just get on with Britain as it was. We'll see who's better off in 30 years. But anyway, the point is, the whole idea of multiculturalism is only really held together by two main strands on the left and right. On the left, again, it's the utopian ideal. We're enlightened. We're past all these old school traditional understandings about peoples and kin and culture and so on. And that will play into this idea of, the Europeans are colonialists anyway. They ruined our lives. If it wasn't for them, we'd all have Wakanda. So that kind of fulfills their own ego. But really what they're held together by is this open hatred of white people. And we've seen that under the era of woke. The length that some people would go to demean, Europeans was absurd. And I think it red-pilled many of us. I mean, I think I was red-pilled before that because I actually studied some of this stuff at uni and was like, hang on a minute, this is insane. And then I left that because I was like, academia's gone nuts. And I went into the corporate world, and then it was in there as well after 2 years. So you can't escape it. But again, it was kind of shocking, I think, the level that it went to. Again, it's sort of gone back a bit now, but it's gone to show beneath all of the lovely multiculturalism, it's quite a biting energy from some people. Not all people, I accept, but certainly from some of them. However, the counter to that on the right to hold the multicultural system together has been business, the corporate world, money. If we can both be winners, there's no reason to, argue with each other. If we can have trade, everything's all gravy. Again, they don't realise that trade is still rooted on a cohesive Western system, but that's a video for another time. But I've seen it myself in London. The corporate schmooze is unbearable. Let's grab a cappuccino and seal this deal down in Pret. It was not for me. I mean, God, the level of inauthenticity is just disturbing in that world. But the point is, you can hold people together if you give them the promise of money. But as Britain starts to fall apart and opportunities become less and less, people are just going to start splitting more and more. And then you get a load of people who are wealthy or run off to Dubai or wherever else in the world, Shanghai or Singapore. Well, the rest of us are left here to pick up the pieces. So what I think is going to start happening after 2029 is the beginnings of this balkanisation process. I say beginnings because it will still take a while to properly foment into really meaningful distinctions between arenas where they're pretty much politically separate. And even if they are politically separate, I still think, the residues of money power will still have their tentacles in each area. But the point is, at that point, I do think that traditional British communities will just have no choice but to be like, look, we have to try and defend what we are and what we have. We have no choice at this point. It's basically now everyone else has their identity and is defending it, and we're sitting here still, listening to the 60s music thinking it's all going to be, airy-fairy. And this will be a big shift, I think, in terms of an epochal shift in our consciousness and how we think. At that point, we will really be the massive strangers, the island of strangers, as Keir Starmer puts it. Can the church save us? I wish it could. I wish it could. I wish it had its masculine strand in it, but I just don't know if it will. At least the Anglican Church, I don't know if it will. Maybe trad Catholicism, maybe Orthodoxy, maybe some other spiritual expressions might. But the Anglican Church, all I can see it doing, unless it's completely collapsed and it's been taken over again by men, proper trad men, who are like the early church fathers, it will just be telling people to be kind and apologise for your own existence and your white privilege, and everything will be okay. And probably they may well see, after all, it's them that's been sinning, not the rest of us when we've been warning about all of this. This mass immigration multiculturalism is going to undermine the church, and is already. It already has. But they still think that it's all just going to end wonderfully, if we just, hold hands and sing Kumbaya. So at this point, I do think around the 30s, 40s, you will start seeing stronger factions, which are heavily rooted in British European identity. And I do think also that some of those factions will probably join up in a Euro-wide way. And again, it's not because, as we're so told, because they're evil and twisted and they're stuck in this, limited sense of ego, whereas the rest of the world is apparently so enlightened. It will be because the Europeans don't have a choice, because their homeland is being just corroded from the inside out. And if we wish to survive in the long run, there will have to be, some sort of defensive posture in order to maintain and survive in the long run. Of course, this will play into the collapse of the USA as well. I mean, is America just going to keep on going from strength to strength? I'm not so sure. I don't know if it can. I mean, demographics are changing there as well. That will change the outlook of the country. Money power is very dominant, has corroded what was left of America there. It's the home of money power in a way. I think America is shaking a bit. We don't know what's going to happen after Trump. I think they'll be in the same situation as Europe, if not worse. That will, of course, open doors for the powers that be in the world at that time. China, I think, will be very, very powerful. They're quietly just keeping things ticking over. Yeah, they've got their problems, birth rates and so on. But they're not afraid to send 1 million people out to die if it's in the service of China. And you know what? Probably of those millions of Chinese who would die would probably be happy to die for China. as many people will do for their homeland if they think it will help their future descendants, in their homeland. And they just have that old school mentality. And they're still building factories, they're manufacturing a lot. They just look in a very strong position. So I dare say they will have a much stronger reach in Africa, in Asia, in Europe too, maybe even the Americas. The Middle East, I think, will be a big one, especially for Muslims, because they've got a load of money. They'll still have oil resources. It will be interesting to see how that pans out. I think a lot of Europeans will run to Dubai, and basically just be sort of like a service class over there, half decent life and so on. But the only way through this in the long run is, I think, going through this process of balkanization. And again, to make it clear, I know you have to be careful these days. I'm not promoting any form of violence. I'm just trying to say, I just don't see how things are going to be peaceful in 50 years' time. I just don't. With the way things are being constructed around us, it just feels like we're in a deep decline, and it's only going to lead one way, and that's to trouble. So, with that in mind, I don't think we should fear these coming dark times. I think in ways we have to embrace them. It's just the cycle of life, Go over history again and again, you'll see that empires come, empires go, and new things are reborn, new power structures. But it's those people that have the vitality, the stillness, the steadiness, the awareness, the peace, the knowledge of how to bear these things that will weather the storm and will come out the other side. So I know a bit of a big video there, but I just wanted to air some thoughts off the top of my head. Be interested to see what you think about the outcome of the next, few decades. Maybe I'm wrong. Who knows? Maybe Farage will just come and save the day. He'll take over the whole of the UK and then take on globalist liberalism, and everything will be magically fixed. But personally, I just don't see it. I think the only way back now is bigger than elections. It's going to be huge epochal change with regard to the very system we live under. And it can no longer be neoliberalism controlled by money power. It's going to have to be something new, ideally with ancient roots, but a new vitality. These are my thoughts, of course. If you're interested in the sister channel and personal and spiritual transformation, do join that down below. Other than that, do consider subscribing to the channel if you're new.